That'd be like me saying I read tarot cards for the glory of God. Like, come on.
Exactly. And I said, no, you cannot serve your
Yeah.
pagan gods and God. You just you
Mm-mm.
can't. No, that's wrong.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Hymnpartial, the podcast where we talk all things church music. I'm Cara Devereaux.
And I'm Monet Funka. And in today's episode, we are talking to Samuel Sey about his history coming to faith in Jesus, his experience within the Ghanaian church, and how far we should let culture influence our worship.
But first, if you're listening on YouTube, hit subscribe and ring the bell so that you are notified whenever we drop a new episode. We're also available anywhere you like to listen to podcasts, but the best way to keep in touch and get around those dodgy algorithms is to go to hymnpartial.com and sign up for our totally free weekly newsletter. There you will find cool bonus content that we do not share anywhere else, and also you'll be notified of all of our newest episodes, and sometimes you even get hints as to what's coming. So to be the first to know what's going on, and of course to stay up to date with what we're doing, go to hymnpartial.com and sign up today.
Yeah, so today's episode,
Oh, we're so excited.
we're totally buzzing. We interviewed Samuel Sey. We spoke to him about a number of things, but I think it was such a fun interview. Like, it was so
Yeah.
great. Like, he's totally a really nice guy. And if you don't know who this is, definitely check out the links that we talk about during the interview,
Yeah.
and we'll have some information about him in the description.
Yep, he's not just like a good person to listen to, he's an excellent writer.
Yes.
And I've been following his blog for quite a while now, and so getting to actually talk to him in person is very exciting.
Yeah, and very humble guy. Just a real encouragement to the church, and I
Yep.
think you will be encouraged by this interview. Samuel Sey is a writer, pro-life advocate, and cultural commentator born in Ghana, but immigrated to Canada when he was a boy. He has written extensively on issues within the church, and his words have been featured on The Christian Post, TheBlaze.com, The Daily Wire, and many other sites, not to mention his own blog, slowtowrite.com. He has been working with the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform to protect the lives of the preborn. He currently resides in Toronto, Canada, and is recently engaged to Annie. Samuel Sey, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
That's all right. Can we start off? Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to faith and about your history with the church?
Yeah. So I was born again. I've been a Christian my whole life. I'm kidding. I always just say that just 'cause but no, I was raised by a Christian mother as early as I can remember. I remember her, I remember her seeing her praying in the room and reading the Bible and teaching me to read the Bible. Um, I I knew as early as 5 years old that I deserved the wrath of God in hell, partly because I was learning from my mom about the reality of our sinfulness, but really, at a very young age, I was living in sin. I knew um, I was worse than the average 5-year-old at that time. Um, yeah, it's just a lot of sins, and so although I knew I deserved the wrath of God, and I knew that if I didn't change, I knew that I would be condemned. It wasn't enough to lead me to repentance. I still lived in sin. I loved my sins. Um, I I was committing sexual sin, and honestly, really at the age of 5 years old. Uh, and you know, so I would go to church every day. Some of my earliest memories is walking from home to church in Ghana, holding my mom's hand, walking alongside gutters in our area for like an hour and a half of a walk, going to church, an hour and a half coming back. And so I was very much raised in the church, but my heart was again far from God.
Yeah.
We end up, my mom is, so as I said before, single mother. My father left our family before I was born. And That led to, of course, a lot of difficulty. My mom was and is a faithful believer, and eventually she ended up remarrying, and she moved to Canada with me. And I continued my sins, but I was still in the church. At 19 years old, I end up being forced essentially to go to a young adults retreat. And what I mean by forced is I had no interest in doing any of that. I'll just go to church on Sundays and that was it. But there was a lady in the church who would just annoy me, just like, Sam, you gotta come. I'm like, I don't want to, leave me alone. So after months of bugging me, I finally said, you know what, fine, just to shut you up, I will just go. And I had no idea that it was just the Holy Spirit, reaching out to me and not letting me go, because I went to this young adults retreat, and something good does come out of young retreats, I guess. I heard the gospel that I had heard really my whole life. But all of a sudden, I just hated my sins, and I loved God. I wanted to serve him. And I repented of my sins. I started actually reading my Bible that I've had my whole life. I never really read it. I started reading it, and I loved God. And that was when I was 19. I've been serving him, still with sin, but I've been serving him by his grace since then.
Praise God.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. I always say, like, the Lord has the last laugh when it comes to what we think we got going on with our life. Very very similar to how actually I was first introduced to the gospel. Someone was kind of harassing me, like, oh, you should come to my church. My church is amazing. Oh, but you're probably too busy. Oh, you're probably tired. You're probably this, like making excuses, like kind of like taunting me. And I was like, oh, just to shut this person up, I'm going to go. And the Lord was like, you sure are going to go. So that's wonderful. So you speak a lot about cultural issues, especially around ethnic kind of tensions in the West. How do you believe this filters into the church? I mean, especially in regards to music, how do you reconcile kind of the music traditions of the Ghanaian church with North America and maybe the more Reformed traditions? I know that's a big, giant question, but answer what you can.
That's a great question. With the ethnic issues, or just really critical race theory and all of this, it's leading, of course, to a lot of Christians rejecting what Paul says, in that there is no Jew or Gentile, that we're all. So some are saying, no, there is Jew and Gentile. Therefore, we need to have certain things that caters to our ethnic backgrounds. Now, there's a difference between simply recognizing a ethnic group or a culture. And there's one thing about wanting to disregard biblical theology to cater to a culture. So one of the things that I see happening is I see a lot of Christians wanting to reject historical strong theology in hymns, or just basic traditional Christian songs with theology, and replace that with cultural songs that have very bad theology, but would cater to their flesh. And that is the way that I see this. And of course, it only leads to more division. It leads to more man-centeredness. And then instead of worshiping Christ, we're worshiping a culture. That's a huge concern.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's culture is such a hard kind of battleground for all of the church leaders kind of in the West. I would say in the world, really, because what the culture wants may or may not align with what is appropriate for church, or what is biblically sound, or what is, right and orderly. So it's really difficult, I think, for church leaders to reconcile that in general, but obviously more specifically when it comes to kind of what they'd say, like maybe in the US, like the Black church. I think in Scotland, it gets even more divided. You might have the Ghanaian church and the Nigerian church.
When we first were in Edinburgh, we belonged to a church plant, and there were 3 or 4 black churches in our area, and they were the Ghanaian church, the Nigerian church, the something else. There's like 4 different nationalities, and they were kind of very like, we're the black church, but they hadn't even just separated down from skin color. They'd separated off in terms of like, this is where we're from, and you know, the Ghanaians don't go to the Nigerian church, and the Nigerians don't go to the Cameroonian church or whatever. But that was pretty shocking for me. I thought, like, wow, that's something.
Yeah. I grew up in when I moved to Canada, I grew up in mostly a Ghanaian church as well. And then eventually I went to a church that was it was basically an African church, but really it was like 90% Ghanaians and just everybody. And I saw how unhealthy it really is, because it's one thing if people are just naturally just and if there's a church, if there's a Ghanaian neighborhood, and it just happens to be there's a church there that people just going there, not because they're Ghanaian, but just because it just happens to be a church in that area. That's not wrong, right? When you are going to this church, particularly because it's Ghanaian or Nigerian, that's a concern, because again, you're going there because you want to recognize all believers as your brothers, but you're going there because you want to recognize Ghanaians as your brothers instead of Christians, sisters. That's a deep concern. So it's something that, especially in Toronto, where we have a heavily immigrant population. I think 55% of immigrants, let me say this differently. 55% of Torontonians were born outside of Canada.
Wow.
And so we have a heavily immigrant population, and therefore we have so many different kinds of ethnic churches. It's a major problem here because there's then no unity within the Toronto. So as you're having right now, for example, we are having quite a crisis in Canada or in Toronto with the church as it deals with the COVID reactions and the lockdowns, the vaccine passports and everything. Here's the problem with these ethnic churches. There's no unity because everyone's doing their own thing. But if you had just the entire church in Toronto being able to see one another as just all of us are family, then you would actually see a much more unified, cohesive group in figuring out, okay, how do we deal with this to serve each other, to serve our city?
But I guess in that regard, there has to be a bit of a culture shock, and maybe you could speak to this a bit, but a culture shock for folks that immigrate, Christians, true believers that immigrate to Toronto, and they walk into a church and they're like, what's going on with this music? Like, it must be, maybe it's assuming, but like, how would you describe the kind of music scene or the music time of the worship service in a Ghanaian church versus maybe a more native Torontonian church? I don't know if I said that correctly.
No, you said it fine. It's interesting because a lot of Africans, or particularly West Africans, especially Ghana, Nigeria, for example, we were colonized by the British. And therefore we grew up with hymns. So I remember even in school at the time, I don't know about now, but at the time you would start off the classes with hymns. So for a lot of us, the hymns coming in with a traditional Methodist or Baptist hymns were fine. But as I'm sure you know, West Africans are very expressive with our worship as well. What we tend to do is we'll sing a hymn or more historical song, and then we have that out of the way. Now we have the praise part. Let's go dance. And there's a part of that that's very unhealthy, but there's a part where it becomes very man-centered, where you're not dancing for the Lord, you're just dancing because it's just what you do. But at the same time, it is healthy to dance within order, right? Within a structure, and not just being, I'm forgetting what the Bible says, basically being disorderly, as First Corinthians mentions. So when you, because my very first church in Canada, or at least one of the first churches, was this white Pentecostal church,
Mm.
and it was very different than what I
Mhm.
was used to. And you know, my mom, being the faithful believer that she is, she's always told me that, as I said earlier, that the church is made up of more than Ghanaians.
Mhm.
While we might have a shock and say, okay, well, we can't dance in this church, that there's much more, there's much more important things than being able to dance or being able to
Yeah.
feel free to do what you're used to doing in your home nation.
Mhm.
In heaven, of course, there will be different tribes and languages there. And I want to be, and really, the main thing is, I don't want to be served. We should not desire to be served. We should be willing to serve other people. So
Mhm.
those cannot be to our preference. If that's what the majority of the church is used to, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with wanting to change certain things in
Mhm.
humility. Um, but we want to be serving and not wanting to be served. And maybe one final thing I could say is, it's very interesting because, as I said, I grew up in the Ghanaian church, and I eventually left the Ghanaian church to go
Mm.
to a very radically different church, which was
Mm.
the Dutch Reformed Church.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So going from just dancing for like 30, 40 minutes before the sermon, then going to a church where there's like barely even any singing,
Mm.
it was quite a shock.
Yeah.
But I also learned so much about, again, how to serve
Mhm.
other people, because
Mhm.
I had to adjust to that. But
Mhm.
again, Christ came to serve and not to be served. The least I could do for him and his church is to seek just my own interest, but the interest
Mm.
of my sisters.
Amen to that.
For sure. Um, but come back to what you were saying about serving others and some things are okay to change and things. Biblically speaking, how far should like our culture and traditions be allowed to influence our worship?
I think if so the main thing about worship is that we have to be singing hymns and psalms, to glorify God. So, meaning the words have to be biblical, they have to be theologically sound, no matter what. Once the theology is right, once God is once God is being served by our words, then it's, well, is it orderly? Are we being Christ centered in how we are going about it? And then after that, there's nothing wrong with allowing the natural inclinations of a culture to be evident in how you are singing these biblical songs and how you are organizing, how you go about doing so.
Mhm.
So I have no problem with people dancing in a
Mhm.
church, so long as, again, it is done in an orderly fashion, is not
Mhm.
man-centered, where they're not
Mhm.
disrupting the service,
Mhm.
which Africans have. I can as a Ghanaian, it can be a bit, sometimes it can be a bit intense, and often it's not worship. It's
Yeah.
just man-centered expressions. So I think so long as the songs are biblical and Christ-centered, so long as it's orderly, then there's nothing wrong with certain expressions from a culture being evident in how they go about it.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
completely agree. I think it's an important line to draw for whether you come from a very conservative church background or a very more Pentecostal charismatic church scene. It's about that balance of like, what's the priority? Bible, orderly, and then, of course, we're all different. We're going to express ourselves differently. We have different talents. We have different things accessible to us, right? I mean, we did a whole episode on the organ, and there are a lot of kind of older traditions that are like, it's organ or nothing. Like, organ is the most holy instrument in the whole world. But it's like, do you know how expensive an organ is? Like,
Yeah.
to have an organ like
And
installed.
like to have someone that can play it as well.
Oh
like,
yeah. It's a very complex, very expensive, very kind of status symbol to have an organ in your church. Even the more electronic ones now, they ain't cheap, but a guitar is like 90 quid depending, like
yeah, it's pretty easy to learn as well.
Yeah.
I was thinking though, as you were speaking, like if we have our theology right and if we're orderly, then it's unlikely that we're going to pull in anything from our culture that is biblically inappropriate anyway.
I completely agree with you. I got myself in trouble I guess I'm used to doing that. At a speaking engagement, it was a discussion, and in Canada we have a fairly strong history with the indigenous or native population here, and historically they've been harmed by the church in many ways, sadly. Um, but there's something called smudging. I don't know if you guys are familiar with smudging. It basically it's basically a indigenous or native pagan worship.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and there are some professing believers here who want to incorporate smudging with worship. And there was a lady next to me who claims she's a believer who was, talking about how she smudges, for the glory of God and things like that. And
That'd be like me saying I read tarot cards for the glory of God. Like, come on.
exactly. And I said, no, you cannot serve your pagan gods and God. You can't. No, that's wrong. That's simply that has to stop. And just very well, it's my culture. I'm like, well, that's the problem, right? Because you see it as, well, you can't reject your culture to obey Christ, but no, you have to. And really, it's not even your culture. Really, it's your religion. It's your former religion you're holding to. And sometimes we don't want to separate our culture. Now, of course, some cultures are very much tied to a religion, but it's not the only thing about a culture. And many people don't want to let go of that. As a Ghanaian, I know that historically we were pagans, and there are still to this day, especially within the prosperity gospel in Africa or Ghana, you see the traditional pagan traditions in Ghana, some wanting to incorporate that into worship. But you have to reject that. And as you're saying, you're right, that if you are seeking to use biblical words in the songs, if you're seeking to be orderly, those things will just naturally, you will not be as tempted to follow that with those two things in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel we might have touched on this question a little bit during our chat just now, but I do kind of want to hone in on, particularly in your experience, do you think the way folks do music in a church, the right way or the wrong way, could be an idol or an unnecessary kind of source of division in the church?
Absolutely. I've seen it too many times where people many do not seem to understand that worship is really not about us. It's about worshiping God in truth and in the spirit. And it's really about Him. Is God satisfied with our worship? And of course, that the worship is not just the songs. Worship is the entire service. And a lot of people are just thinking, well, does the songs feel good to me? Do they make me feel? Do I enjoy it? And look, I'll tell you guys this. I'm preparing to, as you mentioned earlier, I am engaged to my fiance now, and I'm preparing to go to her church in Ohio. And her church is more traditional than my church now, as in we sing newer hymns. I love City Alight. I'm a huge City guy, and they don't sing City Alight just yet. And I won't lie to you, I'm like, man, I like my City Alight songs. But it's not about me. The songs that they have. Of course, I love the classics, but I love the classics plus the newer, the Geddes and the City Alights and some of the great stuff. And they are more so focused on the classic stuff. If I go there, I can just say, hey guys, here I am now, serve me, right? But no, it's not that. That's wrong. I'm there to serve them. And the Bible says that we should outdo one another with good works. That means then that I said earlier that we are all trying to seek the interest of the other, not our own. And if we do that, we'll actually naturally serve one another. But because God is wiser than all of us, right? If you're seeking the other person's good and they're seeking your good, naturally everyone pleased. Now, although again, that's not the main point, right? The main desire is to honor God and to enjoy God in our worship. And yet, by doing so, God is good in that He also welcomes us to enjoy worship with Him.
Yes. Right on. I'm like, well, how many things can I say I agree with without it sounding just like I'm repeating myself? But you're so right. I think it's making sure that we're decreasing in how we serve and live and worship, and that really does create such unity in the church and I think like a trust amongst believers and within a worship service. If we're saying it's not about us, I think it just breeds a new culture, a Christian culture that's healthier than what the, local culture says is good. And that really should be what we're striving for, no matter where we are in the world or what our ethnic background might be. So,
Yeah, we belong to a new kingdom now.
Yeah.
I have one more question. It's the one that's going to get you in the most trouble. It's the most difficult question, but we always ask this to everybody. So, what is your favorite hymn?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I go back and forth. Okay, if I have to pick one, I want to pick on one, but I like to be strict with some of these things. Okay, probably There Is a Fountain Filled with Blood.
It's a good one.
Yeah,
that's a really good one.
Yeah, it's that's one where I struggle to sing that, those lyrics, just because of just every line so profound. Yeah, that's the very first time I heard it. I remember I heard it, I think, from just an album, a Christian album, and I was just in awe of the words. Yeah, that's my favorite hymn.
Is that a Cooper one?
No, it's Robert Robinson.
Oh,
you did the episode on this.
I don't remember I'm so terrible at this. We do all these episodes on songs, and then like the name of the song and like all the information around it I remember, but the actual person who wrote it, I'm like, huh? Who?
It's fair enough. We have like 60 episodes now, so
I know,
we're getting to that point.
We do have actually we did a poll a few months ago saying like if it was actually based off of a tweet by someone in the States, and I'm totally blanking on names, as I just said. They've tweeted if you could like banish a hymn, forever, like no one could, what would it be? And someone put that There Is a Fountain, because they were like, it's so gory, drawn from
different. Come thy fountain of every blessing.
No. Yeah, so it's Cooper.
Okay. Come thy fountain of every blessing is Robert Robinson. There Is a Fountain Filled with Blood is Cooper.
Yeah, so I was right.
Did you say, which one did you say?
There Is a Fountain.
Oh, I was thinking
right.
Come Thou Fountain. Oh my goodness.
I'm the only one that's listening.
I apologize.
I didn't want to correct. So I was like, okay, I'll just
let them duke it out. They'll come to their conclusion.
I was wrong. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it is. But no, someone did say, oh, I would banish that song because it's so gory, like drawn from Emmanuel's veins. And we're like, we don't like to tell people this, but you're wrong.
We ended up doing an entire episode where we were like, here's why you should love this hymn. It's amazing.
It was just in response saying, dear person, let us convince you that this is the best song. So no, great choice. We give you top marks for that.
I'm glad. I'm very glad. I was struggling not to pick I love other hymns too, but City of Light, I don't know. I'm a huge fan of those guys. And
I love their song May Christ Be All. Every time I'm like, choking me up there, buddy.
No, that's a great, they have so many, Jerusalem gets me all the time as well too. Love that song. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. There's so much here that we've been wanting to discuss for a long time, and I think you gave us a really good perspective, a biblical perspective, really to chew on. Again, if you have never heard of Samuel Sey, you need to go check out his blog at slowtowrite.com. He has a lot of good things to say, and we're biased because we agree with him. And also, if there's some songs in here that you are unfamiliar with, we'll link them in the description below to make sure that you can check them out. But thank you very much, Samuel, for joining the show.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.